Welcome everyone to our first meeting of the new year. So Happy New Year to you all. I'd like to remind you that this meeting is video voice recorded and live streamed from the hdsb.ca website. And I would like to ask that you turn any devices to silent mode at this time. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe and the Atawurundon, the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exists. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. At this moment, I would like to call the meeting to order, and I am looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Someone? Thank you. And next, I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes of the December meeting. Thank you, Heather.
And we should actually do a vote, right?
Vote, okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Great.
Approved. I'd like to move forward into the action part and ask that Sean and Mark speak to the after-school skills development program for students with autism.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So you're going to see Sean and I up here for a while, and because we have the pleasure of talking with you about two important aspects of our work, one new and one ongoing, and certainly welcome your input. So can we change to slideshow, or is that up to me? Right, present. Great. So I did foreshadow this in our, I think in our December meeting, talked about this initiative that the ministry has asked all boards to engage in. And we are moving along with this work, and I'd like to share with you tonight our work to date, and certainly answer any of your questions and welcome any feedback or input that you have. So the after-school skills development program is an expectation of the ministry. I'll change slides here. And an expectation for starting this year that all boards engage in this work. So specifically focused on students on the autism spectrum disorder on the spectrum, and focus on developing skills for students in these areas. You can see social communication, self-regulation, life planning. So the ministry has provided funding for this, for program-related costs, but has been specific about it not being, that we can't use it for transporting students. So making that point, as you see further along, how we are spending the funding, but that's an important point, I think. So we've spent a fair bit of time investigating other boards that have run this program during the past 3 years. The ministry offered boards to be able to participate in a pilot starting 3 years ago. We didn't participate in that. but there are a number of boards in the province that did, and so there was lots to learn from those other boards. Quite a bit of information was shared by other boards through the ministry, but we also reached out to those boards ourselves as well. And so we learned quite a bit from their experiences, so that we, in essence, didn't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We could take from their models and look at those. We decided on a model very similar to what's being run currently by Peel Public next door to us. And we chose that because we, number one, liked a lot of what was in there, felt that our communities were similar in certain ways in terms of demographic and socioeconomic realities of parents commuting, and you know, the sort of ability of families to participate at, you know, different times of the week, etc. So, so we're going with this model where it's not actually after school, it's on Saturday mornings is when it's going to run, knowing that lots of families couldn't get there after school if we were actually going to run it at that time. And with the model being a focus on, certainly on the student, but also on the parent / caregiver and their skills, their ability to support that child, knowing how important that is, that that those caregivers are able to support those young children on the spectrum. And so you can see our model there is to run 10 Saturdays each morning. And starting off in the spring, we'll look at winter, summer as a possibility. We heard feedback from Peel about the pros and cons of those. They said certainly the fall and spring sessions run the best. Some challenges with the winter, summer. So we're starting with this spring. We're going to start with one site because we want to make sure we start small and do this well as a beginning point. So we're going to run it in Milton, being the most central in the board, and 12 students, which is in essence sort of 2 classes, if you want to say, of students on the spectrum, and a 9 to 11 model for parents, because staff need time to make sure they're ready for those students each day, and then debrief about how that has gone and be prepared for the next week. So that's the model, sort of the main skeleton of the model. So I'll run through this if you don't mind, and then I'll take questions at the end, because I may answer your questions as we go, if that's okay. So in terms of the students and the parents, our focus is kindergarten students, and we decided to go there because we thought the earlier we get to our students and their caregivers, the better. So that's our starting point right now. Keeping in mind, I should say this at the beginning, that this is a learning experience for us as well as a board. We haven't done this before, and so, like I said, we're learning from a model that was highly effective in a neighboring board, but it doesn't mean this is where we're going to stay with this. This is our starting point, and what we're going to what we know worked elsewhere, but it may change over time, where we shift to other grades of students or a different model as we move along. When we looked at other boards, you know, we heard 10 different models, all of which sounded good in lots of ways. So there's lots of ways that we could approach this. We thought this was a good fit for us in Halton. So this is where we're starting. So the intent here is that the parent or caregiver is a participant with the students the whole 2 hours they're there. It's not a drop-off and pick-up model. It's where we're helping both student and parent move ahead with those skills that are, you know, targeted through the program, knowing how important everyone that's in the life of that student is able to support them. So that's the model, is that the parent or caregiver is a partner in the classroom with the child the whole 2 hours. And in Peel's model, they've opened it up to have other family members participate depending on the needs and the focus of the child. So, for example, if there's a real challenge with sibling relationships in that family, they've said, bring your siblings along so we can work on that, on those interactions here in the program, for example. So it's not that everyone can be at 10. So if the family wants to bring all the aunts and uncles and everybody, it's not that we have a whole crowd of family in the classroom. The others can certainly come and observe, but we definitely want the prime caregivers to be participants all along the way. You can see that there is an application process. The intent is that staff are, we're doing this right now, we're looking at who would be the most appropriate students for this, because we have a pretty good idea now of who our JKSK students are on the spectrum. And so we want students that have needs in the areas that we've talked about, and then we're going to we know, we want parents to apply because a big factor is, can they be there Saturday mornings, right? So for them to, express their interest to us after we've approached them, and then we will do a selection process. We don't know if there's going to be more than 12, if we're going to have a wait list, or if we'll have, just that right number. We'll see as we go along. But once again, we know that this is a starting point for us. So the profile of students you can see there, JK or SK with autism, and then these are the skill areas that we're working on in the program. So we want to know that they're going to be able to benefit in the program in growing in these areas. The staff, they're going to be pretty involved. We're going to be pretty staff intensive to start because we want to make sure we're able to do this well. So if you think about 2 classes, so a teacher in each class, an EA, an ECE, and then the other staff you see is a speech path, an ABA facilitator, being able to work between the rooms. We may have some other staff in there as well. We're talking about whether we have any of our instructional program leaders supporting the staff as, as a consulting kind of support. But we'd rather go with a number of staff to start to make sure we really have a good, successful experience this first time through. And then we may back off in future sessions depending on how we learn is the best way to go. So, administrator to help oversee the program to start. And certainly we're going to be providing professional development for staff as well. As the program moves along, we want to really be monitoring how our students and our parent caregivers are doing, how they're growing, the confidence they have, the skill acquisition that comes. So we're going to be doing some pre and post data collection right from the beginning, and then evaluating, sort of tracking our students as they move along through the 10 weeks, and then some follow-up in the form of that data collection and potentially parent surveys and other ways of evaluating our success of the program. A report for parents at the end about how things have gone, what's worked well, the strategy that we've used, and potentially some next steps that they can then share, back at home or in the community with the, as they have, some of these parents would certainly have community partners that they're working with, also with the teachers, either that year or the next, that they could share as well. And then the ministry is expecting reporting from us along the way through this program also. So that's the main pieces there. And then I'll just to share where we're at with this process, because this has come at us. We heard last June, I believe, is when we were told all boards had to do this. We didn't get the details really till November. That's when the ministry shared with us through a webinar the details of what we were to be doing, and had our funding confirmed. So we've been, I know it might feel late, but we've been moving sort of as fast as we've had information. So, so we're here sharing this with you today. We would have shared, normally we would meet with administrators and share with them. We can't do any of that right now because our administrators are staying in their buildings, not attending meetings because of the labor sanctions. So we'll be probably sharing with them through email. Our unions we can still meet with, so we'll be doing that with the staff groups involved. And then with staff, we'll be most likely sharing through email, but also through job postings so they know what's going on. Certainly, we're working now on communication with parent guardians so they understand the purpose of the program and what's the expected outcomes that we're looking for them and their child, expectations of them in terms of their participation, and we're anticipating some real interest, but we'll see as we go. Staff, we're going to begin a hiring process January into February. We'll do a selection process with students in February so that families are ready to roll. March 28th is our first Saturday after the spring break. I'm pretty sure we're still at Escarpment View. It looked like from we're trying to do it at a school that's already open, if that makes sense, on Saturdays as opposed to paying custodial costs and all that. So Escarpment View runs an international languages program on Saturday mornings in Milton. So we're just confirming. We didn't realize, I think they've got 17 rooms they're using. The program's really growing there. So we're pretty sure we want to run it in kindergarten rooms. So we're pretty sure we can get, I think we'd like 4 kindergarten rooms if we can, anticipating that. There are times when all 6 students will work well together, but there are times when we will want to be able to divide them. So it would make sense to have another room available for both classes. So if we can have 4 rooms available, we also want to be able to use the gym for some activity, certainly go out into the outdoor, learning play area as well. So have good use of the facility, and Escarpment View certainly has all that as part of their facility there. And then we're looking at resources. We were just talking today about some parent resources that we want to be able to purchase to help parents. And then once again, determining professional development that staff can be involved in. So those are all next steps that we're in process with. So no cost to parents for this program. So I think that's all the sort of the main nuts and bolts and structure that we're sharing with you tonight. And this isn't going forward, but oh, that's the end. Sorry, I thought I had a question slide there. So that's where we're at with this. We're excited about this opportunity, to support kids and families, and happy to take any questions that you might have. Sorry, Lou should be.
What is the process for student selection?
Great question. So once again, our staff have gotten to know our students better and better in kindergarten in terms of their needs and profiles. And staff were heavily involved with students in kindergarten and even more specifically students with autism or our speech language pathologists. So our starting point, and we've learned this again from Peel, is to begin by working with our speech paths in identifying students who would be a good fit. So we're just talking today about next steps, about the sort of that triangle of the speech path and the teacher and the CERT. So all those knowing that student and family and saying, so based on those skill areas that we want to grow, who are the students in JKSK that are a good fit that way? And then we're determining that process with the school and with our staff to then say, okay, so we've identified, I'll pick a number. Let's say there's 50 students that we think are a good fit. Then approaching those families and say, here's the program. Are you interested? Are you available? Saturday mornings, and then coming back with, because I would expect there'll be a number who are, but a number who also aren't or can't for a variety of reasons. So then for that information to come back, and we've talking with Peel, they said they didn't want to, and I think we're trying to avoid this too, not stay away from making decisions based on, well, has this family had this opportunity already, or are they involved in private therapy, or are they sort of not make those factors in this, really talk about who's a good fit and would benefit, and pick 12 students that we think are a good fit to start. We may have a waiting list. We actually hope we have a bit of a waiting list, because we think that perhaps between when we confirm with them, yes, you're in, and March 28th, we may have some that have to drop out for whatever reason. So we'd like to have a bit of a waiting list that we can be able to draw from as well, to have those students in place. So between that speech language pathologist, class, team, initial identification, approach the family, they apply, we then pick 12 students who would be a great fit back in our department, and then share that back with families. So there will be, so when we contact them after saying, the student would be a good fit, they'll receive information. We're doing a write-up. We're just meeting about that today, where we articulate this in a comprehensive write-up for parents. And then really their application isn't it's not necessarily about the form. It's more about them saying, yes, we would, we're really interested and want to be a part of this. And then what we're also talking about today is then us reaching out further to that family and saying, okay, help us learn more about your child and yourselves as caregivers, so that when they come together on that first Saturday, we've got some great program designed around their needs, and I've been able to focus on the specifics of what are the needs of that child and family. Does that make sense? So we'll be doing more interaction with them to help get to know them better, so that we're really ready for a great program on that first day. Does that make sense? Should I just keep going with people? Sure. Diane.
Thank you. I have a few questions, but one is just a follow-up. If you do have a wait list, which I know you probably are going to, since it's just focusing on JK and SK, and you're holding it in the fall or spring as your potential, with March 28th being the first, is there a potential for those children who are on the wait list to be moved off in terms of grades? Like, just because of the timing, they're going to move into grade 1 and they miss that opportunity. What's being done about that? And part 2 of that, would they, if they are on the wait list and say they're in JK and then potentially moving into SK, would they be given first option to be in the next program?
I think you've been sitting in our meetings, or at least listening in, because we've had all those same discussions, and didn't want to jump the gun too much, because we're certainly very optimistic that this will be a great program and opportunity for these students and families, but we didn't want to jump the gun and say, okay, so now in the summer we're going to do this, and in the fall we're going to do this. We thought, this is 10 weeks, so we have time to certainly learn as we go. And then as, we're not going to wait till the end, because that'll be too late. But as we go along, then, decide along the way, okay, so what would this look like in the summer? If we do this, what would our model be? Instead of, we wouldn't do Saturday mornings, obviously, in the summer. We might do 2 straight weeks of mornings, for example, as a way of doing it. The research says that the students would benefit and grow. There's sort of an ideal of about 20 to 25 hours is the time for some real good skill acquisition, and for that coaching model with the parent caregiver. That's the sort of recognized amount of time that we can see some real benefit. So we don't want to truncate the program, nor stretch it out too long. So we want to learn from that. And then are we getting the real benefit at this age group? What would it look like if we moved it on to other grades? Because there are certainly students in all grade levels that would benefit from different kinds of models. But like I said, we decided to start here as our first point of learning for us as a board. So might we move on to another grade, and might those students on the wait list be have an opportunity? Maybe. I think it's just too early for us to say.
Just to follow up to that, I know this is just a starting point and something coming off of a pilot program, but is there any value, especially if you're looking at data collection, to follow up that initial group or future groups with a refresher or a follow-up as the challenges in the social skill area, communication change with the grade levels, to actually track one group at different grades and with follow-up?
Another great idea. I think you've still been sitting in our meetings. So we've talked a lot about where might this go. We've been continuing to contract the services of Alana Gray. You've met her here a few times. If you remember, Alana conducted our all 2 phases of our special education review. So we've been fortunate to have her. She's doing a couple other projects, so we're able to squeeze in some of her time on this as well. And so she's going to be involved. She was in our meeting today talking about, so what's the sort of the pre-data that we're going to gather on our students and hear input from families from the get-go, and then monitor our kids along and certainly on the exit. And then we have talked about, so what, how do we know the long-term benefits? But once again, it's a bit of a learn as we go. We also are, something like that, we're also exploring with the ministry how, if the word is flexible, is the funding. They've articulated that you can use the funding for this, 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 and this. You can't use it for that. But they've also said that you need to use, they've given us funding for 3 years, so they've told us we are limited to that. So might it go beyond? They might, we'll see, but if we're going to track students then beyond, how far, I guess, can we stretch our dollars in terms of our, if we're contracting someone like Alana, how far can we stretch that? So we're all conversations we're having.
Sophia?
2 questions. So this sounds amazing. I think it'll be such a good support for these kids. One, so will all staff then be aware of this program? So you're going to, I guess the SLPs and certs, we're going to pick a couple of them, but in Halton, will all, like if I was to bring this up in conversation with a cert in a school, would they be aware of this program?
So we are doing, part of our plan in terms of communication is some general communication to staff. So we want an awareness out there for sure. If you were to ask any elementary cert, that they would be aware of it. The specific details, we talked about this again today, that do we need to drill down to this with every cert in the details, because we have 300 and whatever certs out there. Do we need to try and get that out to all of them, or and I'll say right now that the only way we could do that is on email right now. We couldn't have any kind of meeting dialogue because of the sanctions. So our speech paths are in a different labor group, and they can meet. So right this Friday, we have a meeting of our speech paths where the manager who was in our meeting today is going to talk about this. And with the intent being that because they're sort of that initial group identifying students, they need to know this really well. And then if they're saying, hey, Mark in that class there would be a great candidate, then the speech path can talk to that cert and say, let's talk about this program and really understand it and talk about whether the student's a good fit or not. So it's not the level of depth with every cert, but they'll know enough to start, and then the speech path will raise their level.
Yeah, and I guess speech paths are in most of the schools, so they know. I guess my concern would just be equitable access to the program.
Yeah.
So it's not like handpicked by a couple of SLPs.
Right.
That it would be equitable to everybody.
Yeah. It's not the intent at all.
Yeah.
The
yeah,
intent
no, of
is.
course, yeah. Because I
that-
think if you look at the framework, a lot of the kids on the spectrum at that age level fit that criteria.
And that's, we thought this may not, we don't have to be maybe that discerning because you're right.
Yeah.
There's, it's a pretty
Broad.
general set of criteria that would fit lots of kids at that age level.
Yeah. My second question was, it sounds like an amazing program, and I think for a number of years we've talked at the HDSA about some sort of after-school program or camp or something for our kids to develop their skills. So is this something maybe we could look at expanding in the future? How, like, do we have funding set aside? Like, I know we've talked about the ATRT camp, but again, like, there's nothing really that services our community, kids with developmental delays because they can't go to the regular summer schools and things like that. So there really isn't anything to build their skill. And this sounds like an amazing program. I would make a suggestion to the board look into if there's ever any extra funding or anything that comes from the ministry to look at servicing some of our kids in a program like this.
For sure. We know lots of kids with, from a broad range of exceptionalities would benefit from other programs. You know that our funding is pretty specific to what goes on during the school year and the school day. And so the ministry hasn't provided any other funding in that way. They have done some other, they do obviously provide, I'm drawing a blank on the term of you would call summer school. Thank you. Concurrent education, so that funds things like summer school. And so, but has pretty specific parameters to it. So they did provide funding a number of years back for a primary literacy program, but once again, it was very specifically focused in that area. So if more funding comes along, we'd love to be able to do this. But obviously there's, the big cost is staff. I'd love to say that our staff would all volunteer their time, but they have lives and families, et cetera, as well. So yeah. It'd be great. I agree. If the opportunity came along, we'd love to do it.
Thank you. Deirdre?
Just have a couple of questions. One, I'm not sure if you mentioned how many children you were going to put specifically in the 10-week program initially. And then my next question to that was how many caregivers each child could have within the program. You had said a parent or caregiver, and then you kind of talked a little bit about siblings possibly. So I'm just wondering how many per family. I'm sure you've spoken about how many people you're looking at if you're looking at possibly 4 classrooms. And then my other question was when we're talking about equality for the program, you mentioned it's going to be in Milton, but then there's no funding for transportation. It's a Saturday morning. So obviously it's going to be specific to those who can travel and be there because not everybody obviously can get wheels. Is there any way that we can accommodate that? Or if there is a summer program, will it be moved around or because not everybody can get to Milton? Yeah.
Did we have a mic in our meetings that other people were listening to? So you can see up on screen here, so that third last bullet, around 12 students for the first session. And we did that because if you look at the ministry's parameters on class size for students with autism, a self-contained class for students with autism, the maximum is 6. So we're running 2 classes, partly because of that number, but also we wanted to not have only one class and sort of one team on their own. We wanted a couple running that could learn together and work together in supporting those students. We have talked about multiple sites, and what we heard from the other boards, all their advice, the ones who started off 3 years ago, they all said start small. Where the boards that did that and were successful from the beginning said they're so glad they did it. Others tried to start big and said, yeah, we wish we hadn't because it was pretty daunting to have multiple sites, multiple types of programs running at once. They said, start small, stay focused, learn as you go and then grow from that. So that's why we followed their advice. So might we expand to more than one site at a time in the future? We might. Might we run those sites in different areas of the board? We might. Certainly all things that we're considering. So so I hope you hear me saying we want to do this right the first time and then grow from there. So thank you. So family members, that will be part of, the model is the intent is that we're helping parents and caregivers learn how best to support their children. So that's why we're saying, the parents givers have to be there. It's not a drop off. They're there in the class with the students and the staff the whole 2 hours. So who those will be, I would think in most cases it's mom and or dad, but it might be grandma who's that primary caregiver, right? Or it might be the uncle who does most of that. It might be the teenage sibling who does most of the care. So that's what we're going to learn through the conversations we have with families once they're identified, starting with that SLP, and then we get into those conversations of who's interested and able. Then we dig in with them and say, okay, so who is it that is really doing that care and should be part of this coaching program that the learning's going to happen through. And so do we want to have 40 people in the room the first day? No, obviously not, but might it make sense to say, hey, Sean, why don't you bring your your spouse and your teenage daughter with you next week because we're working on this, right? And then Deirdre, can your husband come next week? And all those kinds of things as we work with that family. So we anticipate that there will be more family members there along the way. Some of them might be there to observe. Others might be there to participate. Certainly the main caregivers are participating all the time. And once again, this is us learning from Peel and saying they saw lots of benefit to this. But also remember, they've been doing this for 3 years, right? This is our first go at it. Our staff will be learning as well, anticipating what those needs would look like. And I think this is more like, if the right word is summer camp, in terms of the type of programming and opportunities and learning, more of a relaxed, free-flowing kind of, intentional, but it's not school, if you want to, call it that. So with the opportunity for that sort of rich environment and learning that can happen with the caregivers there as well. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Heather?
Thank you. I have a slew of questions, but I'll start with a couple. Firstly, is this going to be a special program of sorts where the staff are covered under the collective agreements? And how is the hiring process going to look for the different groups?
I'll go there, or you want me to?
You go ahead.
Okay. Sean is quite sick, so I'll start. Yeah. We're going to we had meant to meet with our EA partners today, but the meeting got canceled. So we will be meeting with the unionized groups involved, and then sharing with staff. This will be a hiring process like it would be for night school or summer school, where we post the opportunity for the different staff groups that you saw there. Staff apply for the job, and we do a hiring process to select those staff. We heard loud and clear, probably the most important factor that we heard from the other boards was how important it is to have the right staff. I'm sure you can appreciate the needs and the complexity that these students will bring, and that we need staff that are passionate about working with students on the spectrum, have some skills and experience in doing this, and are able to work well with adults, because this, part of this is certainly that coaching model that we want the caregivers involved with. So having the right staff, the right fit is going to be really key. So it'll be an application process. We're positive that we're going to have some real interest from staff in doing this. And I say summer school. I'll caution our labor partners who are watching, listening in tonight, that we're still determining if it will be just like summer school in terms of the pay and the other parameters, or because we've been talking, Sean was talking with our managers in HR today about, so how does this fit? What are the parameters? How much decision do we have in terms of, compensation, et cetera? So I hope you can probably hear me saying this is a work in progress, right? We're working all this through.
Okay, my second question stems around security and police checks and those kinds of things. We're going to have, so it's at Escarpment View, there's already something else going on in the school with, by the sounds of it, a number of classrooms. And then we've got parents and people that we don't necessarily know in our kindergarten class with a bunch of little kids. So where are we at, and what are we thinking in terms of security and police checks, et cetera?
So you can probably imagine that in that Escarpment View site with those 17 international languages class, there's a lot of kids and parents coming and going. And so there is a administrator on site that helps administer that site every Saturday morning. There's also, that's why you saw, in terms of the staffing, you can see a principal or vice principal as part of that staffing as well. Certainly safety has been part of our discussions. We haven't talked about police checks for parents. I guess we'd have to think about, I don't know, did you hear that from Peel at all?
In discussion with Peel, because it's the families all coming together, there's an understanding between all the families that we are there to support them in supporting their students. It's not the same as a classroom setting where parents might be coming in and visiting, and you wouldn't be I as a parent sending my child to school wouldn't necessarily expect adults to be coming into that classroom that aren't part of the board. This program, it's built into its concept, so everybody coming in would know that piece, and they're there for that purpose. So it never came up beyond that point.
Yeah, I guess then, I guess there's value in that. A challenge would be, we're getting more and more pushback from police departments around the volume and the time it takes to do those vulnerable sector checks. So I'm not saying that they're not willing. In some community, if you're not familiar, in order to do a vulnerable sector screening, you have to apply in the community where you live. So you can't say, oh, it's really fast up in Fergus, I'll apply there if I live in Milton. You got to do it in Milton with that police department. And so for many of our police departments, some of the wait times are long, like 4 to 8 weeks. So we would have to be quite ahead of the game to get, for families, to be confirmed for the program, and then go and get a police check to be able to participate in March. So I'm not sure if we could even meet that timeline. So, like I said, Sean, it hasn't sort of gone beyond the discussions we've had in Peel, because I guess the intention is that, again, it's not school, right? If you think about it more like a summer camp, you kind of sign up knowing what's going on, right? And we try to really articulate that you're one of several parents in the classroom participating in this opportunity. Is it something we're going to monitor and be mindful of? Yes, but I'm not sure we can or want to get into having that in place. It's something we're thinking about.
Sorry. I was just going to jump into that, but surely the parents will be there with their own child at all times. So hopefully, yes, whoever they have chosen to be the caregiver of that child. So you would hope that the child isn't alone with a stranger in that setting. So there is some level of assurance, I guess, that we can have, is that the child will be with somebody who is designated as their caregiver throughout the day of the program.
And if you can look at the screen, we have a teacher, an EA, and an ECE all in that class all the time, plus these other staff coming and going for only 6 students. So there's certainly lots of eyes on. It's not like a parent being in a class of 25 where you may not know everything that's going on all the time. There's certainly going to be a high level of awareness with the number of staff there.
I'm just trying to get an idea of what it's going to look like. And so I'm understanding that it is a parent caregiver coaching. All right. So that means
Skill development for students.
Right.
Right.
So I'm visualizing parents having a lot of questions, what should I do in this situation, what have you. Meanwhile, the child is going to be doing something like, it seems to me that a lot of the focus is going to be on the parents rather than a social communication for the child. Am I misinterpreting that?
As Mark said, we're working towards understanding what it's going to look like as we go through this. We've got some ideas based on Peel's model. So if I can give you an example of what might happen, a big part of the last hour of every session is the team coming together and looking at how the child progressed with the goals that were set for that day, and are they going to be set for the next one, and then having that communication with parents as well. So it's almost a week-by-week goal setting, come on in, conversations. So as one example that was shared with us, let's say Mark has difficulty at home transitioning from one activity to another, and the family has a real challenge with those moments. Let's say it's bedtime routines, something like that, things that are fairly common with students on the spectrum. That student may come in with that goal in the family, wanting to work on that goal. Our staff, working with the programs that we have and the expertise, would be working with with that family specifically on that goal. There could be 6 goals going on in that classroom simultaneously. Odds are there's going to be some clustering of goals. There's going to be overlap and similarities. But let's say there's 6 very different goals. We would still work with the parents on that. And there'd be activities around, all right, let's have an intentional transition moment. How are you doing that in the home? Here are some suggestions. Let's go back and practice that. It might be that one of the teachers takes one of the caregivers out to another room and says, all right, what are some of the goals right now? Here's how we're progressing, while the teacher or the EA is working with the caregiver remaining behind. Looking at those, somebody else is collecting the data as it's happening, going, oh, I noticed this with the child. And then the team sits down at the end and says, what did you see about student A through F? All right, what can we do next week? It is really an individualized program. And it's based, we won't know until we meet the students and the families and what their goals and their needs are. We have some anticipatory thoughts, but nothing concrete that we can come to the table yet with. Does that help?
I'll just add, the intent is that as a coaching model, that the parent is learning alongside with the educator, right? So where, if they're working on that transitional opportunity, in terms of what's the preparation that looks like? What's the language that's used with the student? The educator, whether it be, teacher, ECEA, is modeling that for the parent alongside. They're sitting on the floor together beside the child, doing that kind of modeling, giving the parent the opportunity to practice and try and then learning, okay, when the child does this, how can we respond? Doing those kinds of things together. So really involved hands-on parent and educator working side by side, learning how to support that student. So the kind of work, you know, if those of you that might know staff who are really experienced in working with students with autism, we have staff that do this every day, right? Whether that be in a kindergarten class or in a life skills class or wherever, they do this really well every day. And but the parents don't get to see it, right? They're not in the classroom with them. This is a chance to be in there and learn. Oh, okay, that's how you help my child move from this to this, and then them to think, okay, so now how can I apply this at home? So it's that kind of modeling, coaching, support that we want to see parent and child benefit from.
If there's one last question.
I can see great consistency if they're all on the same page of what's happening in the classroom, and then the parents being able, or a caregiver, to translate that at home. Just more of a curiosity question. You mentioned at the start that this was a pilot project that started 3 years ago, and the Halton District School Board didn't choose to participate. So how do you choose which pilot projects you are going to participate in and which ones not? And since the other schools that did choose to participate in the pilot program, you said they're 3 years in, do they then get additional funding for another 3 years? So will they have, in essence, run the program for 6 years?
So this is my 6th year working with student services, or in student services, and obviously there haven't been many pilot opportunities come from the ministry. So 3 years ago when this opportunity came, there were a lot of questions that we had about it, and I actually spent a lot of time speaking with my counterpart colleague in the Halton Catholic Board, and because he and I agreed early on, we don't want to have one of us participate and the other one not. We wanted to have a consistent approach with the community, and we had a number of concerns about the model that, as it was proposed by the ministry at the time, and we are also concerned that what it would look like or feel like in the community if the pilot started, and we've seen this with some other ministry initiatives, and then doesn't continue. So then what will be sort of the expectation or feeling around, okay, come on, school board, you got to continue, and there's no money. So we decided to wait. Let's see what goes ahead with this. So now it's not a pilot, right? That was a pilot before. Now this is an expectation of all boards to offer this, and so that's why we've jumped in now.
Okay, this will be the last question.
I'll certainly welcome other questions after.
When the pilot project was going on, did Peel, in this case, did they give you any kind of feedback with regards to support throughout the week? Like, say you're learning something on Saturday, how to do like a transition, like you had spoke of. Now, what if Wednesday comes along and it's like not working, and the parents need some advice or would like to reach out to a teacher or whoever was helping them? Is there going to be that available support in between sessions or in between classes?
That's a good question. It never came up in conversation with Peel. We have ongoing conversations with them, so that's something we can certainly ask moving forward. I think that's going to be a conversation we have with staff and the availability. And again, once we understand how the relationship works with the staff and the families working together, how that's going to look.
Okay, Mark, if you wouldn't mind taking in further questions, maybe a little bit later.
Love to. Hey, if you want to talk to me afterwards or send emails just like any other month, be happy to answer more questions. And my guess is that you'd like to hear back at some point how this is going. So perhaps towards the end, maybe our June meeting, or if not then in September, we could bring back a fulsome update of how things have gone and what our future plans are, because we are funded for this for 3 years. So.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to move on to the next agenda item, which is the Ei Allocation Process.
That didn't work.
Thank you. This was brought up, I believe, a number of times, even before I was here. So here we're at the point where hopefully we can address some of the questions Yak has regarding how we allocate EAs. Part of the presentation, and we'll be sharing it with you. It's a long presentation. I'm not going to be reading every slide. You can read through it. But it is important, I think, to preface that the EA allocation process is part of a bigger understanding of how we support students, and certainly our students with special education needs, ultimately ending with working towards independence. I think everybody agrees with that piece. Regardless of who your child is or what the needs of your child is, every parent is working towards making their child as independent as possible. And so the EA allocation process certainly falls within that parameter. The other end to it is it's also a finite resource. We're not dealing with something that's absolutely infinite, and we can give everything that we can ever imagine. So there's a number of slides at the beginning that speak to the independence piece. I'm not going to read. I'll go slowly through them. You can take a look at them. I might address some of the key points. And then the latter third of the presentation is more about the mechanics of how we go through the process at our board. And then at the end, an opportunity for questions. And then I believe we're going to do a breakout and ask for input from SIAC around things that we can do. I'd also like to start by saying that even though I've only been doing this for 2 years in this role, I've been part of it for a number of years, and every year it changes slightly because we want to get better and better. Nothing is ever fixed or permanent because we see better ways of doing things, and the process changes. So part of tonight is certainly to ask for your input for that purpose as well. This came from the Council for Exceptional Children article, and this is what's speaking towards the independence. And I apologize for my voice. It may go at some point, in which case Mark will take over. He doesn't know that yet. So these are just questions that we also ask this of our staff and of our administrators when they consider the EA needs for their students and their schools. There's an element of these questions being rhetorical, but I think they're pertinent at the same time. Like, they are ones that we do need to struggle with. They're not totally self-evident in answer. We have to ask these questions continuously. And the research has shown us some of these things to be true. And all of these are done with the best of intentions, but the outcomes sometimes are unanticipated. I think that last point is the crux of everything, is that our goal is for each student to feel as an integral member of the classroom, where they have a sense of contribution, where they see their contribution being valued. That's where our real sense of belonging comes as individuals, is when we can see our contributions being valued. And we want that for all our students. So a lot of what we try to do in the allocation process and in supporting students, regardless of whether it's an EA or other members of our staff, is to be intentional, to have some sort of sense of what that fated support is going to look like, rather than just as a means to stop gapping an issue or a situation. What are we actually doing? And it takes a lot of intentional thought. One of the studies done from the Child and Parent Resource Institute, CPRI, in London, and we send a number of students, or we work with CPRI with a number of our students here in Halton. So this was conducted, 15 years ago now, 18 to 30 years of age of these students, and it shows you a breakdown of the group. And this is how the students defined their level of success. I don't know if those three responses are in order of importance based on the study. It would not surprise me if that were the case. Having friends, having a sense of peers, the ability to work, even at part-time, is a significant factor in a student's sense of worth, and then living independently. But these are the results. Again, this was 15 years ago. I don't have a current study, but I would be interested in seeing what the numbers are like now, certainly in the next 10 years, given how the changes have been made to how we support students and what our focus is. This is something that is a key component of our CPP program in secondary, trying to provide students with opportunities in workplace environments and co-ops so that they do have lower levels of anxiety, higher levels of independence, and see themselves as capable workers and supporting themselves in some capacity. Earlier, I believe it was this year, we spoke to Project Search, just as one example of where we're trying to make gains in these areas. The greater the level of independence a student can have, the less these will be impacting their future. But that's CPP, and of course, we want to start right back at FDK, working towards this. This is where we start working with what the needs of the child are and supporting their needs without compromising the potential for independence, to whatever level that's going to be for them. So, how do we do that? Well, let's take a look at this year. I know this is the questions that you're going to be having as well. Right now, these are approximate numbers. Sometimes they change daily, depending on certain circumstances. But when I say approximate, there might be 869 EAs. That's plus or minus right now in our system. 77% are in our elementary panel. 23% are in our secondary panel. I know that leaves 0% for care and treatment. It's actually 0.3%, 0.4%, just because of the numbers we have. I believe it's 4 EAs in our care and treatment. So it just doesn't register as a full number.
I'm just going to point something out that I just realized, that this isn't the percentage of our population, though, right? We're about a third, 2/3 in terms of secondary and elementary. So, which speaks to that we have more, that we have been fading students all along, right? Otherwise, you would see a third of our secondary students still having EAs, right? But they're not, because we fade and there's less and less need as kids get to high school.
Thanks. In terms of distribution based on area, I'm not going to ask you to hold those numbers in your head, but you can see the north is roughly 40%. More EAs are distributed in the north and the least in the west. I won't ask you to hold that exact number, but here, if you look at point number 2, the north has 38% of the population of students in elementary as well. So the distribution of EAs matches fairly closely the distribution of students based on the regional areas. Number 3 there, the number of self-contained classes, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. That will come into play a little bit later as I explain our process. I did put in number 1 there, 630 EAs for 87 schools. Roughly works out, if it was just a straight, every school gets the same number, it would be 70 EAs per school. Obviously, that's not how we do things at all, but that would be the straight average number. So that gives you a basic breakdown of our current situation. In terms of where we distribute our EAs, we have school-based, so you saw those numbers up there. Those are all EAs that are in our schools and are associated with a school in terms of staffing. Then we have 21 regional itinerant EAs. Those are EAs that can be deployed to any school in our system on a daily basis. They're there for helping transition processes, if there are extra needs in a school that are temporary, those kinds of things. They work with student services and they're deployed daily and weekly. We then have food schools. So in, I want to say 6 of our secondary schools, in our food schools, obviously for safety reasons, we have EAs in those. Then we have our deaf, hard of hearing team and our blind, low vision team. Between those two, we have 6 EAs that go out and support students with specific needs. And then we also have our multidisciplinary support team, and they have, I want to say, 6 EAs as well. So they're regional, but they're deployed by our department. So the bulk, the vast bulk of our EAs are school-based. So when you saw that distribution, the 77% and the 23%, that's of those numbers. So where do we start when we do this? We start with a mindset, obviously. It's a cognitive, thoughtful process. It's based on concrete data. It's student-focused, and it's based on trying to work towards the self-regulation of students. EAs are, our main focus is obviously safety. That's the primary purpose of the allocation for EAs. And then with independence and gradual release of independence as well. What that support looks like, and we talk about layering of support because sometimes there's shared support, sometimes there's clustering of classes, clustering of groups, those kinds of things that all come into play. All learning environments. So that's where we come together and start. Now here's more of the mechanics. We are given as student services a number, a starting number to work with for our EA allocation process. We also simultaneously go out into every single school. So we have 15 IPLs that will go out, and they'll start probably in the next few weeks. We've already begun our meetings, and they meet with every CERT and IPL, or sorry, every administrator and CERT in every school, and they go through the needs of the students. And there's a form for every single student, so it's quite exhaustive, you can imagine. And we look at 15 discrete criteria, and we rate them on a level of 1 to 4. So the school has input. The IPLs are in the schools regularly too, so they know these schools, or the students for the most part. Level 1 being a significant needs for support. And I'm very cautious not to say a level 1 means full-time EA support. That's not how this works. Level 1 means significant needs for support or not independent. whereas a level 4 would be greater independence, more independence. And it starts with that because we want schools to be thinking about what are we doing for the students in terms of supporting their independence. What's a reasonable piece? So that's all inputted into a database, and it takes a significant amount of time. We give ourselves a couple of months to get out there, get all this information and put into a system. Then we also sit down as a department and we look at the what must-haves. So we have our SIP grants. Those are ones where we have more than one support person for that student. Could be because of a behavioral need. It could be because of a physical need where lifts are there, where a 1.0 support isn't sufficient. It's a special incident. Mark knows the P part. Portion, thank you. Thanks, Lorna. Yes, special incident portion. And we submit those reports to the ministry every year. I will point out that just because we ask doesn't mean we get it. And even if we do get it, it doesn't count as a whole extra person. It's only a portion of a certain amount. Special incident portion. Did I get that right? Okay, thanks. Regional EAs have to be taken off that. When we get our number, we have to take off the 21, the DHOH, BLV, all of those ones off the original number as well. Students with cochlear implants, we do consider them for a 0.5 automatically. That's built into our system because of the needs. That is one that can be faded over time because as the student becomes more familiar with the use and more experienced with how the cochlear works and that it is working, because there is a time that it takes to adjust to it, then that can be faded as well, or the EA can be shared. But it's certainly one we look at and we consider within every school. And then the secondary food school and CPP are taken off that list because the CPP programs get a certain portion as well. They have the significant needs obviously there, and we want to make sure it's there. So if I said to you we were starting with 800 EAs, I might be down to 650 by the time I take out all the secondary CPP and all of those. And then that's the number we're working with based on when we consider the needs assessment. Yeah, I was, but I'm... It's more direct to the group because there's only 6 CPP programs. We can sit down and we actually go through line by line by line, and we look at the needs and the supports. When you're dealing with 650, it's clustered to begin with. Now I say algorithm is run based on the above. The algorithm it's just a mathematical formula that's used to start with, here's the number we're working with, here's the needs assessment that's been indicated for this child. All 15 criteria are factored, and we can weight different areas, and I'll show you that later, based on what we want. So I can run the algorithm 10 different times and come up with 10 different numbers. And we have done this, and then depending on how we weight them, the variance is very minimal. But we do that to ensure that there's some level of validity and reliability in what we're doing. It's not just one number. So then a number is crunched out for a child, says this is the level of support for a child. Obviously 1.0 would be the maximum. But that doesn't mean 1.0 EA. It means that child needs support 100% of the time. That includes other staff as well. Then that's clustered. So all the students in a school are then summed up, and we have a report that we get that says this school gets this many EAs. That's not our end point. That's our starting point, in fact. Then we sit down. Sorry, I'll just come back. It's hard to see here, but there are 6 domains. And this, if you just look at safety is one of them. That's the image on the right-hand side. So you have health and medical, safety, adaptive functioning, mobility, sensory, and communication. As an example, safety, you can see the number 5 beside it. It has 5 subsets that we look at. So self-injurious, behavior injurious to others, support to self-regulate intensity versus frequency, use of alternative learning environments. So we would be sitting down, the IPLs would be sitting down with staff from school saying, okay, talk to me about this student. Are they self-injurious? No, not at all. Okay, that might be a level 4 then. Highly self-injurious. This child needs somebody with them significant amount of the time. Okay, that's a level 1. We do that. So health and medical has 3 subsets. Adaptive functioning has 4 subsets. Mobility, sensory, and communication, that's it. It's just one piece. So that's if you add up 3, 5, 4, 1, 1, 1, you get your 15. Is there a behavior safety plan for the child? And what's their current level of support? So that's what's all put into the system and held on record. It's all converted then into these numbers, and we can do it in multiple ways. Again, the must-haves are removed from the working number. So then when we have these, we sit down as a team, and for 3 to 5 days, we're locked away, and we go line by line, school by school. And we look at what the school currently has, what the school needs are based on what we know at this point. And this includes pre-registration. It could be the kindergartens that have registered, which is why we do it towards March. We do it after the registration dates, and it's why we ask parents to register their children as early as possible. It's so that we know. Also, if students are moving through, particularly from elementary into secondary school, or if they're moving from one school to another school, sometimes we know that in advance. We try to get as accurate a report as we can. It is never 100%. People register after we've done this, and I'll get to that later on. Things happen. But we go through literally line by line, and there are thousands and thousands of lines, and we discuss with the kids, we discuss the students, and we discuss as a team what the needs are, what they look like. Does this make sense? Sometimes we could have 6 students who all indicate, say, a need level of 0.5 staff for the day. That would suggest 3, right? 6 times 0.5 is 3. But the staff know that those 6 students are in a self-contained, let's say, life skills class where we've already put in 2 EAs. When we're not putting in another 3, that doesn't make sense. So then we go, okay, what does make sense for this? So maybe 4, and it becomes a conversation. It is a finite number. At the end of the day, we have to make sure our numbers add up to that final tally. But we spend 3 to 5 days and we take a look at those. Then we send that out to the schools, and they receive their overall allocation. They don't receive the individual student by student, and they receive the overall, and then it's their job to determine the distribution of those. So if they get 10 EAs, it's theirs to determine the scheduling and where they see fit. We give guidance, we give suggestions, we do share these are the needs. But sometimes we find that in September, what we thought was a need, some students come with greater independence because of what's been happening over the summer, and some less because the summer's happened, and they come, and we want schools to have that flexibility. They know the students, whereas if we say this student gets this, we don't want schools to feel bogged down by that piece. So that's where we land. We're always adjusting. It's never a set piece. It's in constant re-examination. IPLs and schools are continually coming back saying this is what the needs are, how they're changing. So I know the questions are going to be what happens when things change. And there are 4 sort of models where a change can happen. A student leaves, a student arrives, the needs of a student change, or a student moves within the board. So if a student leaves, it may be that nothing changes. It may be that the needs of the school are such that they have the right support, and so the EA allocation remains the same in the school. Or it may be that based on the student, now the needs of the school are more than met, and so we can take that extra support and move it somewhere else in the system. When a new student arrives, this is what we always come back to. We want to get to know the student first. We want to see what the needs are. We want to have a chance to work with the child. This is why we have those itinerant EAs. They can go in and support during that time, help with the transition, work with the staff, free up staff to get to know the student. If there is a requirement for an EA to be moved to that, then we have to look at the system and see where that can come from. Those are pieces that we have to work out on a case by case. The needs of a student changes, and I go back to that very beginning, the independence level. It's something we want to work towards. So hopefully as the year goes on, the independence is increasing and the needs are decreasing. And we can then move EAs around. Schools can do that within their own building. They can take from one situation because the student has become more independent and share that support in other areas. Sometimes it's to give the student a chance to develop the independence, those pieces. And again, always back to that intentionality piece, knowing what we're looking for. We use the behavior logs, the notes and everything to draw on that piece. One of the bigger questions I have from parents and from schools as well is a student moves within the board from school A to school B, and what happens. And it isn't an absolute given that if a student has a support in a specific person in school A, that person moves to school B. It's just on an absolute for certain right off the bat. It's not a no, but it's not an automatic truth, and I'll explain why. We ask several questions. First off, what was the need of the student at the school? That's our first question. How much support was actually required? And then what are the needs of the sending and receiving schools? The sending school might still need that level of support even if the child leaves. The child could be in a self-contained class. The child could be in a mainstream class moving to a self-contained class, in which case the support is already in the classroom where the child is going. These are things that have to be considered and asked, and what the pieces are. That we could know that another child is moving into the school even though one is leaving, in which case to move an EA out and then have to move another EA in of some level of support, that creates a lot of problem. Teams work together, and we want our EAs to have a sense of working with the team. And if we're constantly disrupting that, it's not good for the students either. And then what type of class or program is the student moving from and into? So these are all considerations that we need to ask before we make any decisions. Again, going back to what best serves the students in the school.
So I think Sean, you've certainly shared a lot of detail in terms of our philosophy around, trying to really move students towards independence and also our process. So I anticipate that you might have lots of thoughts on this in terms of, what you like about this, how you think we might improve it, etc. So as we've done with some of our other presentations and discussions, I'll show you first, here are the questions that you're going to have the chance to give us input on when we do our rotation at the tables at the back. So what do you see as the strengths of this process? What do you like? Suggestions for improvement. I think you heard from Sean loud and clear, we're always trying to make this better. So what ideas do you have to share there? And then is there more that you're wondering about? Are there other questions that you have that maybe we haven't touched on? So those are the three questions on the chart paper at the back. So right now, are there questions of clarification? Things that you heard that you want a little more understanding about before we dig into your input at the back? So Heather, we'll start there. Is that okay, Lucille?
So with the weighted situation, and it is a perception out there that EA allocations are given to students that are flight risks or have safety plans, behavior safety plans. And am I wrong in thinking that because of all the weighting that's typically where the allocations are going? That's the perception. I'm not asking just for myself, but I'm also asking for Trustee Shuttleworth.
Sure. I'm not sure what you mean by the weighting. The only weighting that's done is when we run the algorithm, but we run all sorts of different weighting just to see if it impacts significantly. And so far in all our variations, it hasn't done anything significant. So when we're looking at needs and supporting needs, so if you're talking the level 1, 2, 3, 4s, that level of weighting, that's based on student safety. So that's a fairly significant piece. Student safety, student support, and student access to curriculum in that order. But flight risk certainly would be something that would, if a student is a flight risk, a significant flight risk, under safety, self-injurious, that would indicate probably a level 1 if the student is doing it regularly. The school would be better equipped to speak to what that looks like if they've had experience with the student. Where it becomes challenging is if we don't know the student yet. It's like a pre-reg piece. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I'm not sure if I'm clear on the question in terms of the weighting piece.
I guess I can make it more simple. The 77% in elementary, is that the majority of that because of flight risk or behavior safety plans?
I can't say yes and I can't say no. I'd have to look at the numbers. I would say that students with safety plans have a level of support. I would say that flight risks would probably have a safety plan, so there's an overlap piece there. But we have students who have behavioral needs or self-regulation needs, in which case that's where the support would be used as well to help those students be able to regulate their behaviors. And it wouldn't necessarily be behaviors that are injurious to others or those kinds of things. It would be just their ability to manage themselves. And then I think you would see that 77%. I'm trying to draw the numbers out of the spreadsheets in my head. More weighted towards the primary grades and decreasing as you move up the grades, again, as that level of independence grows.
Okay. Yes. It's just come up now. Yep, we do.
Yes. Okay, just a quick question, a clarification rather. If a student was, let's say the allocations are done, school has 70 A's for the year, and then a student comes in that has really high needs. I want to clarify. So does that mean now we're going to take EA allocations away from the kids that are already in the building and allocate to that student, and now we're short? Or then, like, how does that work? Because I've heard a lot of conflicting things here. Principals, to be honest, are not entirely clear sometimes. Also.
And I can appreciate that. And it's a challenging question because the answer is going to be, it depends. It will always depend. If it's just using yours as an example, a challenging student comes in, let's say from out of board. We're unprepared, we weren't ready in terms of knowing that the student was coming. They show up on our doorstep. And so the school has an allocation we believe is appropriate to their needs. So we have options at that point that we have built into our process, which includes an itinerant to go out to the school to support during that time while we get to know the student. Because a student may come with what is perceived to be significant needs, but we might be able to handle them already. So that's why it lends itself to, well, let's wait and see. Then if you're going to push and say, well, what if it actually is a student who has significant needs? Will the school have to allocate within what they already have? If there are no other availabilities in the system at that point, we would be working with the school to find supports in how we can, using an itinerant as well, because they can be a little bit more long-term, but also let's go in and take a look at the schedule. Sometimes those opportunities are given to us to sit down with the school and say, let's actually look at how you're using your allocation. Because that same scenario in September is a very different process or response than it would be if it happened in March, right? Because then we might be saying, well, let's take a look at How are we fading support for which students? Is it even considerable to have breaks taken where the child is given 15 minutes of independence during lunch? Those kinds of things. Whereas in September, it might be, no, okay, we're still settling things down. And we do a revisit early on in September to make sure after kids actually show up where they're going to be.
Yeah, because I think
So parents, your parents are going to get different answers. We're going to have different answers depending on what if the student is showing up in a self-contained class, if the student is, there's all sorts of factors. Every situation is going to be a conversation with the school. Now, your bottom line question that I'm going to anticipate is, if the school has exactly what it needs, and it's really stressed, and it's doing an excellent job, and it's even beyond, and this student comes in, then we look for where we can find support somewhere else.
And our itinerants, like, can they stay longer? Because I think the current practice is principals feel like, well, our hands are tied. This is what we have to make do. And so what happens is your kids who really need that EA support, who may not be self-injurious, then lose that support that they really need for academic gains and IEP implementation. But because they're not a safety concern, they lose that support. And I think, like, it's troubling. And I think I appreciate all of your the independent slides. And absolutely, the ultimate goal is for independence. But I think speaking to the parents that we represent in our children and their sort of description and their needs, many of them, especially with now the larger class sizes, so you have a child who, is not disruptive, not a flight risk, but needs significant help, with their numeracy and literacy, and the class has 30 kids in it, and you have one teacher. Realistically, that teacher, and I'm a teacher, so I get it, cannot realistically implement that IEP or the goals in that IEP without the support of an EA. And so that's when that, of course you want that kid to be independent, but if independent means he's just going to sit there now during math class, not have any support, that teacher's not going to get to them for a long time. And they're not running out of the building, so does that mean then that they're not getting the EA support? So I know you're in a tough situation too, because you're working with what you have, but I think sometimes we sort of fool ourselves to think that, yes, we want them to be independent and this is ideal, looks great, but that's the reality for some of these kids is they're not safety concerns, but they have significant needs. And truly, to implement their IEP, they need support beyond the teacher.
I think it's, so that's once again, I think because we could have we could talk about this all night, right? And I know that's, your intention of putting this on the topic list of presentations was to hear from us to try and help you gain a clear understanding of our process and our rationale. So hopefully Sean's done a good job of that tonight. So if we can spend any more time now on, because I know, Louise is going to be, or Lucille's going to be giving me the yeah. So if we can, once again, questions of clarification to help you better understand what you've heard, and then it's the opportunity for everyone, as opposed to one at a time, everyone to be able to throw out your questions and your suggestions and all those things on the charts at the back.
You put me on a spot because this isn't really clarification, but I do have this burning question. Thank you very much for the information that you've provided tonight. It's been very helpful. Between that information and what we've heard from our parents and our work within the school, a lot of the EAs appear to be being assigned for health and safety issues. And seeing as an EA is an educational assistant and is supposed to be helping with learning, our question is, has there been any thought given to hiring PSWs to deal with the health and safety issues? A, they're better trained for health and safety than they are, than EAs are, and B, I think they happen to be a little bit cheaper.
So we, like all boards, are certainly looking to our current employee groups to how can we best utilize their skills? How can we also help them grow their skills to meet the needs of our students? So That's a piece of the work that we do all the time. You know, you've seen, I think on my last update, I showed all the different professional development that was offered in, I think, in November to help you, be aware of that learning that goes on for our staff. So we certainly want our staff to be as capable as possible to meet the needs of our kids. I think all boards are looking for how to be as effective and efficient as possible. And that's partly of that is partnership with the organizations that do training out there for our staff and their education, their qualifications. And so we have staff who are on sit on advisory councils in the various colleges around. So we have someone that sits on a panel at Sheridan and Mohawk, et cetera, and are talking with them about what do your programs look like, what's the learning that's going on to help our staff, not just EAs but other roles as well, be as prepared as possible for what the needs are in our system. Because what we don't want is someone applying for a job, whatever the role is, thinking it's one thing, and when they get here, they find out it's another. So we want them to be really well aware and well prepared to do that role. So that goes on as well. In terms of personal support workers, if you don't know what a PSW is, like I said, I think us as well as other boards have looked at a variety of other roles to say who best to meet the needs of our students. Are we currently looking at that? No. Is it a possibility in the future? It might be. I'm just saying we're not there at this point.
I think if there's no more questions of clarification, we should move over to the...
Great. So these are the 3 questions on the charts at the back. And so there are markers back there with these questions there. So if we could break into 3, approximate equal groups back there, and this is a chance for everyone to chime in with your input for us, which we'd love to hear. So let's, as we have in the past, we tend to spend a bit more time on the first table because that's, you're coming to a blank sheet, but then as we move through, by the time you get to the third, we move fairly quickly because there's already a lot of ideas down. Okay, so away we go. Thanks.
So moving on with the agenda, we have had quite a lot of discussions and questions so far. So perhaps if we have any further questions or discussions, we can address them at the next meeting, and we can move on to the communication to CHAC. Starting once again
with me again.
with
Yeah.
with Mark.
But I'll just say, if you have questions that you don't want to wait for a month and you want to address them with me specifically afterwards tonight, or to reach out to me, I'd be happy to have discussions with you afterwards. So my report, which you received on the weekend, I don't think I'm going to dive into too much there. I think it's, the bulk of what's there is about our contract negotiations and where we're at in terms of labor. So that is a bit of a moving target, and that it continues to escalate as things move along or not between the unionized groups and the province. So I think I'll just stop it there and allow you to ask any questions if you have any around any of the three items I have there in the report. There's none. My intent of my reports is to try and keep you abreast of the most current issues on my plate and what's going on. And if there's no questions, great.
Thank you.
I hope you find those helpful.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to association reports. Alison?
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to update everybody that the early bird discount for our Solutions for Learning conference that takes place on March the 11th is finishing at the end of January. We'd like to encourage as many people as possible to come. We have keynote speaker talking about building resiliency, and then we have a number of breakout sessions that we believe will be of great interest to people, talking about phonological awareness, executive functioning, mental health, ADHD, literacy, etc. So a wide range of topics. And as I said, the early bird pricing finishes on January the 31st. Also this month we have a parent advocacy and IEP workshop. So we support parents in understanding the school board process of special education, what's in an IEP, how to work with the school in gaining support, and how to work collaboratively with teachers. So that's on the 23rd of January. And then finally, on the 30th of January, we have a workshop on financial literacy for teens. So it will be for teens and their parents working on trying to give children an overview of budgeting, some basic skills that leads them forward to be more independent, as we talked about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I'll move on to the trustee reports.
Okay, good evening. The trustees' membership on the various HDSB committees has changed for this new year 2020. Striking committee report number 20002 from the January 8th meeting will provide you with a list of the membership. Secondly, the work of the multi-year plan steering committee continues. The steering committee members are now looking at a draft multi-year plan engagement report developed by the consultants with feedback from the various stakeholder consultation sessions, including SEAC. This report will form the basis of the discussions by trustees and senior staff for the development of a new draft multi-year plan. And meetings continue to take place between trustees, senior staff, and the local members of provincial parliament to talk about how the new budget formula and changes to education in Ontario are affecting the HDSB. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Joanne. Now we move on to committee reports. The first committee is the Parent Involvement Committee. The Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
Okay, that's me again. The Accessibility Committee met last Thursday morning. There's a new accessibility tool that has been added to our hdsb.ca website to enhance readability and accessibility of the website's content. Users will note that there is a blue icon at the bottom left corner of the HDSB website. By clicking on it, users will find a number of options available to them. A new accessibility feedback and comment survey tool has also been created to allow stakeholders to submit their concerns and other feedback. This survey tool is found on the hdsb.ca homepage. It provides the user the ability to identify a specific location and type of accessibility concern that they would like to report. All the HDSB schools' websites will have a new standard appearance and content by the end of this year. Some schools' websites already have transitioned to this new standardized format. So by looking at your home school, you'll be able to see whether they transitioned or not. And by poking around the different schools, you'll see that the formats are very standard, as is the content, which really, I think, facilitates access to an ease of finding the information that you need. Specifically for parents who have children in more than one school, they need to kind of navigate both websites. And last, all formatting of the HDSB documents is being reviewed and standardized for AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act compliance. This includes the use or non-use of specific fonts, bullet points, formats, etc. So everything will become AODA compliant. And if Mark or Sean have anything to add on that, they're welcome to. Nope. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Joanne, I think the equity and inclusive.
Nope, that's something.
Oh, Joanne.
Hi. Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee. Our December meeting was postponed. It was a combination between, yes, it's December, yes, there's snow, and we also had some rotating strikes. So with everything involved, Mary decided it was wise to just let everybody go Christmas shopping. And so our next meeting is March 12th.
Margot, is there anybody speaking of the Nelson Bateman Integration Steering Committee? Not here, no.
I could just add that the Student Voice Committee has met today, and they're looking at, they have presented their input from the Student Senate around the transitioning over to Nelson. So I don't have the specifics, but I know that committee met today.
Sure, and there was quite a fulsome presentation at the board meeting last week around the integration work. So if anyone wants to see that in detail, they could, I guess, fast forward through the video voice recording on the website and take a look at it.
Excellent. And the NEC and Central Rob Bateman. Alison?
Not much to say other than we will be meeting in February.
Excellent. Is there anything else?
Maybe I'll just mention that in our, we've prepared a few of the topics that you requested in our list of topics to bring here, and a few of those are best done by including our staff in those presentations. So that's some of the planning that we had done, and unfortunately with the current labor sanctions, our staff can't come at night to do those presentations. So we're sort of we knew that Sean and I could do these two tonight, do them, I hope, half decently in terms of the two presentations you heard tonight. But some of the others really are done best by our staff who are delivering those services. So we will continue to work through that as we meet with Lou and Joanna around designing the agenda each month. But some of those will be delayed until after we work through the labor issues.
Thank you.
Oh, use your mic.
Use your mic.
Sorry.
If there's a meeting, for example, I know I can't make, but I know it's a topic that I've been waiting for. If we have just a bit of a heads up as to, hey, in March, we're going to be talking about this tentatively.
Right. Yeah.
Something that may not involve, if you can plan something, that may not involve staff.
Yeah. So at this point, I said in my report, we're going to be bringing the spec ed plan updates next month. Aside from that, it's a little bit of what are the needs, that we need to bring to you, but also what can we have, prepared and able to present well. So we could be a little more planned if I knew that staff could be here. I'd love to say there'd be a deal tomorrow, but I doubt that. So let's see how things go and be optimistic.
Okay. Depending on how negotiations go, if it's not possible for staff to be here, possibly we could use the meetings to do some association information. So each association could take 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and present on what their association does.
That's a good idea, Diane, and we will definitely talk about it when we're planning the meeting, because so far our major topic is going to be the spec ed plan for the next meeting.
Yeah, it may not take too long. I think we have room for another topic there, even if we had maybe one or two associations. It doesn't have to be everybody, So perhaps, because we're meeting soon, are we, for our next agenda meeting?
Yeah, the 22nd.
So we might come away from that agenda meeting saying, is there anyone interested in doing an association presentation? I know you've talked about that in the past as well, to better understand.
So could you guys think about it and then just let us know by the 22nd who's interested?
So LDAH is offering to be the first if we have time on the agenda? Okay, that's great. We'll take that into our agenda meeting to consider.
Okay, I'm now calling for a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Hey, you're not allowed to put down the hand.
Anyway, sorry.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah. Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.